For every.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first session of From Magic to Media. This seminar examines the genealogy in a Nietzschean sense of technical and optical media, from pre-cinema technologies through film and beyond, through its occulted roots in Hermeticism, magic, and alchemy, with the rise of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and artificially constructed images of illusion and deception. It is becoming increasingly imperative to trace the history of our technology mediated realities to the little known genealogies of shamanic performance, ritual, and hermetic magic, and to question the cultural, philosophical, and political significance this knowledge holds for our time. The intersection of magic, technology, and art, especially occult technologies such as alchemy and talismans, reveal the predecessors of much of what we consider technical media and optical technologies, photography, film, the internet, social media, and AI. I would also like to give a small introduction to our facilitator and instructor, Farshid Kazemi. Am I pronouncing that right? Is that good? Farshid, are you here?
Yeah, yes, that's good.
Is
Thank
that
you.
okay? Farshid Kazemi is an adjunct lecturer in film studies at the School of Contemporary Arts, Simon Fraser University. He holds a PhD in Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies from the University in Edinburgh. He is a cultural, media, and film theorist specializing in an interdisciplinary approach to film and media studies, Iranian studies, and Islamic and Middle Eastern studies. On to you, Farshid.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. And hello, everybody. Welcome to the session on magic from magic to media. Um, this is my first time teaching at the new center, so hopefully it will all go well. From what I understand, we will actually be holding off introductions, I guess, especially for me to get to know more of you for the next session. Um, but for this session, I'll be talking for quite a bit, but I expect that we kind of have a more conversation on these topics that we will be talking about today and throughout the course, of course. And so, as far as I understand, that the new center has expectations that you each will make have a project that you will bring for each seminar. So maybe not this one, but for the following three seminars. So basically, what we will do is have me again talk a little bit in the beginning of those seminars, and then as we go along, you kind of will be kind of bringing the thematics and looking at the thematics and the readings of that session, and you will make a presentation based on that. So, for example, today we will be kind of concerned with uh, like some theoretical foundations, as a kind of some presuppositions, some theoretical moves that I will be making uh, in relationship to not just positioning because we're going to go into the history of Hermeticism, but the course is not only about this kind of history or genealogy, but about also thinking about uh, more philosophically and theoretically about the notion of magic, alchemy, and Hermeticism in relationship to media. And so one of the theoretical ideas that I want to propose is precisely the term mediation today. And I want to introduce certain theoretical ideas and presuppositions in a way as to how to go about thinking through media as mediation, and also thinking, are we at the end of this logic of getting closer to the end of this logic of mediation? So these are things that I want to propose today and talk to you about and see what you also think. So this is largely the first session, which I will look at. We will look at the kind of aspect of the theoretical presuppositions of the class. But also for the next class, it will kind of today we will set up also for the next class, which is also a methodology that I introduce, which I've worked on, which is related in a way to kind of Hermeticism itself, and that is what I call archaeopocalypse. So archaeopocalypse is a term uh, that brings together two terms, arche, right? So that's related to what archaeology, so excavation and so on, and then apocalypse. Now, apocalypse, I mean it in the original Greek sense of revelation and unveiling, and that term is going to become more um, fleshed out in the second class, because we will see, first of all, how that is a very hermetic idea, and um, and we will try to actually unpack it and then also relate it to a certain logic that we've already discussed, especially today, because we're going to talk about um, alchemy a lot today, but not just the history of alchemy, but alchemy as a methodological procedure. Okay, so we will look at some of that material, and then so for example, since the thematic for second class will be archaeopocalypse and its hermetic heritage, we will look at part of that history of Hermeticism, and I will bring more of the Perso-Arabic, Persian, and Arabic Hermetic text to bear, in particular, through in that class. And we will see that really, in a way, um, it's this Persian and Arabic, or Arabic and Persian heritage of Hermeticism that gets transmitted to Europe. And that will again start to set up our next class, which is on talismanic media, right? And so that's when we will see that the beginnings of what we see in terms of the optical, particularly optical technologies, have this heritage in relationship to what begins to enter into the European imaginary in relationship to the translation of these texts from Persian and Arabic. Of course, largely Arabic, because many of these texts were also translated first from Greek, Persian, and Indian sources in the Great Translation movement in Baghdad, right? And we will get into all of that as well. And then we will talk about the 12th century as well, when the Latin translation movement occurred, and how that spurred on these new advancements in ideas in relationship to technologies. And so some of the ideas that you've read today will constantly be brought to bear. So for example, you would have read Kittler's section on theoretical propositions, and we will have more to discuss about that today as well. But for example, where he states, he says that in relationship to technology, he wants to kind of relate it first to the body and then to war. And so those two will also be really important, but we will see that particularly when we get to Fontana, Giovanni Fontana's transmission in that text that we're going to talk about, this really important text, uh, these are really important because they are related to technologies of war. So we will see how that itself comes from a Hermetic source. And that Giovanni's source, in a way, goes to what scholars call Pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetica. So we will try to parse out what we mean by, of course, Pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetica as we go along as well. So, and then finally, for the last lecture, we will come to what we consider to be the um, before, in a way, before the advancement, advent of, let's say, uh, computer technology and now AI and so on. We want to think about cinema as perhaps the kind of the apotheosis of the 20th century optical media technology, and to think that also as in relationship to heritage of the alchemical and hermetic past, but also the whole idea of that the cosmos itself as a cinematic apparatus, in the sense that we ourselves are inhabiting a cinematic cosmos. And so that itself is going to be something that we will see dimensions of it in relationship. I will give little breadcrumbs today, but we will try to flesh that out even more so towards the end. And this idea of the universe as itself as a kind of cinematic cosmos in movement. So the very stillness and movement itself, what cinema itself does, and the fact that the very 24 frames per second creates the illusion of movement for us, and that logic, and we will bring a little bit of quantum mechanics into it, because what I want to talk about as well, some of the foundational literature that you've read, for example, in the Aristotelian left, Avicenna, so Ibn Sina and the Aristotelian left. So that's not been arbitrary, because I think what's important is to think through the concept of matter and form. And so we will come back to this logic of matter and form, and how let's say that some of the metaphysical presuppositions of this class will be a reverse hylomorphism. So we will get into that, because hylomorphism, which really comes from the Greek word hyle, which means matter, and forme means form, and Aristotle proposed this basically logic of matter as receptive and form as active, right? So we will talk about that, but the idea is that this philosophical tradition is going to reverse this by having matter as active and form as passive, and the theoretical, philosophical, metaphysical, and social and political consequences of such a philosophical underpinning. Okay, so we will of course have some problematization of let's say Bloch, and because it's I mean, you can't blame Ernst Bloch, because he wrote in the 50s, but it was still a great breakthrough that he did. But there are still some mistakes that I can point out, and some issues that are there, but we will come back to that. Um, and so I will generally I expect you to read some of them, particularly today. There wasn't that much reading, so that you have some background, but I want to again introduce material that you haven't read. And in a way, I want all of that to be in a conversation with each other. So, and also just feel free to interject at any time, because again, I want this to be as well, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to do so. But of course, we after my presentation, we will have more time to do that. But in case, even during my talk, if you do have questions, please feel free to ask or put your hand up. I think is there? Okay, all right, it's all good. Okay. Um, so is there any questions so far? No? Okay. Oh,
Not a question, just a short comment slash thank you for putting Kittler on the list. I don't see him much discussed, and he's one of my favorite authors
oh,
in
great.
general. Yeah, so I was really excited to see him on the list for this seminar. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes, I mean, I had to hold myself back, as you can see, like their classes have like maybe way too much reading. But again, I'm not going to expect, for example, the class on talismanic media, where we talk about not just the heritage of like the emergence of what we could term talismanic media. And as we will see, in a way, the very phone or in the computer, everything we can actually see it as talismanic media, and we will get to that, of course, eventually. But what I want you to not worry about is having to read all those, let's say, short stories. If you can pick the short story that you like the most, and also if there are stories or cinematic examples or film or short film that help you think through this idea of the automaton, basically the animation of the dream of the animation of matter, right? To bring to life a life form that is independent and intelligent, which we are exactly living in our, during this time. Like this is a dream that is ancient, right? And so um, I try to, with that class, give certain, stories that we want to think through with that, with those ideas that I will be presenting. Okay, so uh, let's forge ahead. I'm going to share. Uh, okay, let's see here. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that? Can everyone see that?
Yes, it's visible.
Yes. Okay. Okay, perfect. I have some notes of my own, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to see all that. Probably. Is there a way for me to see my own notes? Oh, let me see here. No. Uh, no.
I guess you have to restart and look for the resharing, but looking at your notes. So if you go to escape and not just share, but there must be an option where, for example, I don't know if you go to I
I
not
have to stop sharing?
yeah, and then I'm not very familiar with this type of no, sorry, you have to share, but then when you do the screen
Oh, okay. Okay, got it. Hold on
there's
a sec.
an option maybe that you're able also to see your notes, I guess.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Let me see. Oh, okay, there we go. I think that one. Is it side by side? No. Is it?
You can share your entire window and then your notes appear with your presentation as well.
Yeah, so
Oh,
if you reshare through Zoom, maybe we can see because yeah.
yeah, I just don't see my own notes, but um, okay, well, I'm not sure how this, hold on a second. I thought there was an option here.
There is it's called presenter view.
There we go. Yes, here we
Yes.
go. Perfect. Okay. There we go. Okay. Let me just, yeah, just, okay. Okay, so everybody can see that? Okay, perfect. Um, so so magic to media. So today basically what I want to do is look at aspects of the magical unconscious of technical media. And that image is actually, we'll get to that. That image in the background is from a manuscript, and it represents Arabic manuscript represents Hermes. So what you're looking at is Hermes, and I will bring that image next class properly, and we'll have a short discussion again about several such images and their significance. Okay. So what I want to introduce is this logic of oops of short circuiting reading as a like basically what why is it goes okay, sorry about that, as a method of critical reading, and it's one that was provided by Slavoj Žižek. um, but we will see that there is a, again, here's the genealogy that becomes occluded because Žižek does not allude to it, but we will slowly start to excavate that. But this methodological theoretical method is something that we will see that it connects actually to alchemy. And so basically the effectiveness of this method as a critical reading is that, you know, we want to kind of, the idea is to cross wires between text, ideas, and you know, any kind of you know, material that could basically, that do not usually come together, but therefore by bringing together new ideas emerge, and the creation of these ideas is what we want to think through today. So as you can see, Zizek says a short circuit occurs when there's a wrong connection in the network, wrong from the standpoint of the smooth functioning of the network. And then so says that Zizek says that to take a classic text, again, text, author, notion, or film, and read it in a short circuiting way through the lens of a minor author text or conceptual apparatus. Minor, again, here alluding to Deleuze, sense of minor, not of lesser quality, but marginalized, disavowed by the largely hegemonic ideology, and how dealing with this lower or lesser dignified topic therefore brings new theoretical insights. And so, as Zizek says, if the minor reference is well chosen, such a procedure can lead to insights which completely shatter our common perceptions and notions. And so, what's interesting is that this is a series that Zizek is one of the kind of editors, called Short Circuits, taking the name from that. And his first book on, he was the first author of this series, and he uses the this notion of the puppet and the dwarf. And so, if you may know, the puppet and the dwarf is this mechanical uh, automata, which was called the Turk. And this basically was invented as to kind of deceive the people in its presentation. It was in fact quite popular in the late 18th century and early into the 19th century. And what's fascinating is that Benjamin uses this device. Again, here he uses, and you will read the text on his thesis on history, where he uses this logic of the puppet and the dwarf. And so we will see that this kind of, there's a very Benjaminian idea where the idea is that the dwarf is this kind of the hidden, what he calls the theological hidden of many of our political, social realities.
Excuse me, Farshid, I'm sorry to cut you off,
Oh,
but right now what's happening is your screen and your face is coming in double. Uh,
oh,
is there a way you could just try sharing the presentation?
okay.
Because it's a little bit difficult to read.
Oh, okay. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can get out of that. Is it better?
I think you have to stop sharing and share again, and just
Oh,
don't select side by side view.
okay. So, all right, let me see. So, I thought everything was going okay all of a sudden. So
It's
let's
good. It's
share.
good. We just see it a little bit small.
Yeah, it was good otherwise.
It was a little too small, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's still going small again.
Is
I,
it?
yeah.
I think you
Oh,
need to select like another option of screening, like maybe the tick should be at the other option.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's on PowerPoint, but on Zoom.
On
When you
Zoom,
share
when
your
you
On,
share.
yeah,
screen on Zoom.
so what's happening? Like, so on
So
Zoom.
to the right, when you share, instead of side by side, choose only
Oh,
content.
okay. So just content only?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Sorry about that. That was a
Yeah,
big
now
problem.
that's great.
Perfect, this works.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So what's this? I don't need that. Okay. And now we will go back to here and just do that. And then I just want to see if the presenter view still works. Does that work? Does it?
No,
now we see your notes, but oh.
You see my notes?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. This is kind of a disaster, but let's see. I'm gonna revert back to just
Use slideshow.
okay, let's just okay. Is that good?
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, so
Thank you.
anyways, I have material that basically, that we will talk about. It's okay. I don't have to look at my own notes. But this should suffice. What the comments on short circuit. But now I want to relate the kind of again genealogy of short circuit as a method of critical reading to the avant-garde. And so, which avant-garde? The surrealist avant-garde. Okay. So, and as we will see, in particular, the early avant-garde were in fact very much interested in magic, in alchemy, in hermeticism, and this will come and be brought to bear as we move forward. So Breton in the famous the so-called father but patriarchy the patriarchy patriarchal figure of surrealism is Breton, and but in his you got to give credit where credit is due, and he also looks at the method of the surrealist method as this idea of being to generate inspiration, um, and he brings about this concept of short circuit. And it's again, this is interesting to think through, because even the whole idea of a short circuit is a technological metaphor. Okay, so this is in keeping again with our idea and discussions on technology, and particularly optical and communication technologies. And he says we can easily recognize that inspiration, that total possession of our mind, which at intervals prehends our being for our problem posed, every problem posed, the plaything of a one rational solution rather than some other equal rational solution. By that sort of short circuit it creates between a given idea and a respondent idea, written, for example. But this can be, again, other any type of text. It could be visual material, it could be film, and so on. Just as in the physical, a short circuit occurs when the two poles of a machine are joined by a conductor of little or no resistance. In poetry and painting, as he says, surrealism has done everything it can and more to increase these short circuits. So we can see that the theoretical idea of a short circuit that was proposed by Zizek, it has its heritage in the avant-garde, in particular in surrealism. And this theoretical metaphor is something that we will see that it also is related to alchemy. So one of my favorite, if there is a favorite, surrealist in terms of the men, I have lots of love for the female surrealists that don't get enough love, unfortunately, in the history of surrealism. But Max Ernst. So Max Ernst uses the notion of collage, that he really, in a way, we could say that he's kind of the progenitor of this technique of which is called collage. And the way he saw it was as what he called as a kind of like a visual alchemy. And so in the large body of his, this is from a book by the poet Paul Eluard, for which Ernst provides much of the collages. So collage here is introduced as a kind of alchemical operation, where seemingly disparate images come together to produce something new. And in a way, this is already, as we've seen, the logic of the short circuit. Okay, so here we are entering the idea of alchemical operation as a methodological operation, not simply only, as we will see, trying to excavate some of its history, but also using its operationality to think and bring about new ideas, new forms, new realities into being. And so this takes on further importance when we come back to thinking through this critical method of this procedural theoretical critical method in terms of alchemy is where we see Walter Benjamin's profound use of the logic of the critic as the alchemist. Okay, so in his basically analysis of Goethe's Elective Affinities, a novel by Goethe, before proceeding to analyze this novel by Goethe, this is what Benjamin does. So he basically juxtaposes the commentator versus the critic. And he equates the commentator to a chemist, and then the critic, which he positions himself as the critic, as the alchemist. Okay, so now let's look at what Benjamin writes. If, for the sake of a simile, one views the growing work as a flaming funeral pyre. Now, the growing work here is, of course, the Elective Affinities here by Goethe, but we can think of any work. Okay? Then the commentator stands before it as a chemist, basically, while the critic like an alchemist. And then so he now starts to tries to parse what he means by this. Whereas for the former, wood and ashes alone remain the objects of his analysis. For the latter, only the flame itself preserves an enigma, the enigma of whatever is alive. The critic therefore asks about the truth whose living flame continues to burn over the weighty founding of what once was, as well as the light ashes of what was lived through. So this is something I want us to think through, and that we want to, in a way, kind of see how productive this idea is, because this notion of an alchemist as a theorist, as a critic, is using this simile, this metaphor of the alchemist, is really important, because what Benjamin is trying to get at is that basically in a way we can juxtapose it to the history of alchemy itself, right? To only think about alchemy as a historical phenomenon, where it originated, only how it developed, we lose sight of exactly the operation, or what Benjamin would say, the truth of the matter. So it is the truth of the matter in relationship to all that we want to discuss here, is we want to get to, not simply get into kind of the historical genealogy in terms of just where did it come from, can we get see the historical connections only. So we want to be more productive in terms of the philosophical ideas that we can operate with and think with. Okay, and so that's why I think that this relationship again to the alchemist becomes important. And then one of the operations that we want to think about is precisely the logic of mediation. Okay, so thinking about mediation is what Hegel calls Vermittlung, is really important. And in a way, for Hegel, effectively says there's nothing in heaven or in nature or in mind anywhere else which does not equally contain both immediacy and mediation. And so this is where, to use this really again, a word that may be confusing to some or very loaded, but it's the idea of the dialectic, right? So this dialectic of immediacy and mediation is what, according to Hegel, is contained in all things. And so we can basically think about it in so many different ways that to bring the psychoanalytic notion of the idea of, let's say, the fantasy. So, for example, in psychoanalytic theory, the logic of fantasy is not just like, oh, I, I want to have ice cream, but I can't have it, therefore I fantasize about it. That is not the psychoanalytic notion of fantasy, particularly one of my theorists, such as Lacan. When we think about fantasy in terms of the idea of this that Lacan works with, is that reality itself is mediated through fantasy or fictions, meaning that we cannot ever access any reality without the fictions that structure reality. Okay? And so therefore here we have mediation. And so here also fictions are not just, just, fictions in the normal sense, that is illusions, right? That it's something unreal, simply, right? But that fiction is productive in relationship to what we encounter as reality itself. And so this also becomes really fascinating, because what some of the material that we're talking about, particularly the heritage of alchemical ideas and Hermeticism and magic and so on, particularly Hermeticism and the figure of Hermes Trismegistus, as we will discuss further in as we go on, a little bit further on, even in this class, there is a heritage of fictionality to this figure. And that is something that we want to think through with. Okay? But how productive has this figure that, for all intents and purposes, has seemed to be effectively a syncretic fiction, is really, in a way, that what the course tries to unpack as well. So bringing in also what's, again, so here these are things that we're doing already. Here you're already seeing the class doing what it is proposing. The topic is becoming the operation. We're already deploying short-circuiting, right? Here by bringing in Simondon. So Gilbert Simondon, a major theorist of technology, says something really fascinating that I like to think about. There's many things that he says, but I wanted to focus on this for our purposes, for our discussions, because he brings in psychoanalysis here, and I want to think through what type of psychoanalysis is he evoking, but there's an illusion within it. So Simondon basically is saying that up to now, when this is an interview that was given in France, and it's available on YouTube. And when you can watch it yourself. When I will share this with you later, so that you can watch the whole interview. But towards the end of the interview, he says, what I think could be undertaken is psychoanalysis of the technical object, similar to the psychoanalysis of elements undertaken by Gaston Bachelard. So Bachelard is being, his way of doing psychoanalytic theory, in a sense, is being brought to bear in relationship to doing something in relationship to the understanding of the technical object. Now, some of this already, because I mean, if you know Bachelard, he was a scientist, but he was also a philosopher and also a theorist and a philosopher of poetics. And his famous text, of course, everyone know the Poetics of Space, but so maybe led to a lesser extent his various works on the elements. So, for example, his important book, Psychoanalysis of Fire, and how he thinks through and does a psychoanalysis of different complexes of fire. So, in a way, towards the end, what we get is not just this kind of what is the history or genealogy of fire only, but these kind of poetic images in terms of the imaginary, like the Prometheus, and or in one in one section he talks about Prometheus, but in another section he talks about Novalis, the German philosopher and poet Novalis, and talking about fire in relationship to that figure. And so the generation of ideas in relationship to this excavation of psychoanalytic dimension of these elements is what Simondon is saying that we need to do in relationship to the technical image or technical media or the technical object. So in a way, we will be conducting all of this with parts and aspects of psychoanalytic theory as well. Because again, I think like going back to Freud, even though Simondon doesn't directly refer here to Freud, but in his book on technical objects, he does refer to the Freudian unconscious, and that's really interesting how he does. And we'll try to come back and unpack some of that as we go along. But as you know, from your reading, for example, a reference to Freud was made by the most famous kind of passage about technology, about being the prosthetics, like how we become like a god and these various technologies become our prostheses, right? And as Kittler mentions, Freud always somehow is like the repressed. He never mentions film, and there are reasons for that, but fascinatingly, he was even asked by those early German expressionist filmmakers to contribute to aspects of filmmaking and to be in kind of as a consultant. Famously on the Student of Prague, which is a really important film, but he declined. So he was kind of this old Victorian that still could not really relate to film, right? But what I want to bring to bear is this idea of words and how words is being thought by Freud, and the significance of words is also because, in a way, words were our first technology, in a way. The first technology of humanity is language. And so that's where language and magic itself become correlated. As Freud says, words were originally magic, and the word retains much of its old magical power even today. With words, one man can make another blessed or drive him to despair. By words, the teacher transfers knowledge to the people. By words, the speaker sweeps his audience with him and determines his judgment and decisions. Words call forth effects and are the universal means of influencing human beings. Now, what are words, again, is the logic of also mediation. Because we cannot access, again, reality without words. Our encounter with reality is again with words, right? So the mediating function of words is really important to think with and to think through, and also to think about the large language models, what we call in a way a misnomer, um, as AIs, and how they themselves are now using words and language. So in a way, they are literally large language model. And so what does that mean for us in relationship to the power of these you know technologies of language, and therefore also uh, thinking through what will this mean for us in relationship to language. Will we one day exit perhaps the world of language? Because there may be these technologies that are better even at language than most human beings. So in a way, we want to think through also language and language as mediation, and also what that means in terms of the history of magic, because the earliest magicians were manipulators of words. And so, in fact, the custodian of these, types of magical formula, by being able to speak, manipulate language, and of course, we can talk about the beginnings of the written language, which is a new advent, and the beginning of that is itself also related to in Plato's Phaedrus, for example. I haven't brought the code for you, but I can send it to you. When the king Thamus speaks to the god Thoth or Tehuti. And that's really important to think about, because this Egyptian god is precisely one part of the figure that becomes Hermes Trismegistus. So the Egyptian god Thoth, combined with the figure of the Greek Hermes, this syncretic commingling is really what produces the figure of, in a way, Hermes Trismegistus. So this problematization in that kind of passage where Plato is saying, we're gonna, in a way, he's on the side of Thamus. So the argument that Thamus is making to the god who brings him writing, introduces writing, right? As we will see, Hermes Trismegistus is really all these technologies is the heritage of Hermes. So language and all other forms of science and technology is brought to bear by such a figure, and Plato through Tammuz is saying, what are we losing, and says the things that we will lose by the introduction of writing. And one of the things he's worried about is precisely memory, and so on. So in a way, we can say that we can transpose precisely that type of debate that we're seeing even in the early beginnings. And by the way, let's not forget that Plato's teacher, Socrates, never wrote a sentence, right? So it's all we know about Socrates is what we're being told by Plato in his dialogues, right? So already we're seeing this kind of emergence of putting language into writing, even in that, in that 5th century BC, BCE, by Plato. So the whole problematic of the introduction of writing is being posed as a new technology. And so we want to think through all that, because in a way we are at the cusp of an introduction by these kinds of large language models and what this means, what we lose, what we gain, because it's impossible now to turn back, right? And so, this whole, we will try to problematize in a way with this whole idea of kind of, AI philia versus AI phobia, right? We don't want to be in one or either camp. We want to think critically about the emergence of these technologies and what they mean for us, and how our relation can be changed if we can imagine in a society in which they can operate differently. So it's all about the transformation of the operationality of these technologies that we will inevitably be transforming our societies, and as already are transforming our society. Back to Breton, I want to, here there are little breadcrumbs that I want to use, that we will follow up into our, slowly already into our next seminar. So in this larger passage, Breton already evokes the image of alchemy in relationship to Arthur Rimbaud's phrase, alchemy of the word. And then he takes on this idea and starts to kind of elaborate and puts emphasis on alchemy, and then how alchemy can be, again, this idea of being able to use it as this analogy of what the operation of alchemy, right, in terms of its artistic practice, its textual practice, and so on. But there are little other clues that I want to share. So he says, is the admirable 14th century any less great as regards human hope and, of course, of human despair, because a man of Nicolas Flamel's genius received from a mysterious power the manuscript which already existed of Abraham the Jew, or because the secrets of Hermes had not been completely lost? And then so he goes on to allude to Rimbaud and then L'Outremont. And this a whole idea of short circuit as well. We could say that even with alchemy and particularly, like the Surrealists, L'Outremont, the famous or infamous figure that wrote Comte de L'Outremont, which is kind of nom de plume. That's not the real name of this person. He wrote this book called Maldoror. And he came up, what the Surrealists were really interested in is this kind of image that we have from one of the writings of L'Outremont, is the chance encounter between, basically like scissors and, I can't remember the analogy, but a kind of chance encounter between a dissecting table and, I can't remember something, but yeah, it's that image of this kind of asymmetrical.
An umbrella.
An umbrella, there you go, yes. Of umbrella, this asymmetrical coming together is something that the Surrealists thought about, and that's basically his logic of short-circuiting that we were talking about. And here Breton also is relating it to alchemy again, and so did Max Ernst, as I said earlier. So he says, I would appreciate your noting the remarkable analogy insofar as their goals are concerned between the Surrealist efforts and those of the alchemists. The philosopher's stone is nothing less than that which was to enable man's imagination to take a stunning revenge on all things, which brings us once again, after centuries of the mind's domestication and insane resignation, to the attempt to liberate once and for all the imagination by the long, immense, reasoned derangement of the senses. And that's, of course, a famous quote by Rimbaud and all the rest, as he says. So what is going to be important as well is that I'm already going to look for the next class. We're going to parse out this mysterious power of this manuscript, which already existed. And so kind of this idea that Nicolas Flamel found this manuscript, this motif of discovery of manuscripts is Hermetic. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about in our class about archaeopocalypse. And the fact that the secrets of Hermes were preserved in such texts. Okay. And Jim Morrison quote, when I was young, I was really a fan of Jim Morrison's poetry. The music is one thing, but I really loved his poetry, and especially his poetry related to media and cinema. And since he was a student of cinema at UCLA, I always have this, relationship to him because of that, common interest that I've always had. And let's not forget that he was incredibly well read in the occult sciences, in alchemy, in magic, and particularly also through the lens of the Surrealists. He was very fond of the Surrealists. And so this text, this little kind of aphoristic statement, cinema, heir of alchemy, last of an erotic science. So here we already come to this crossing of wires, this short circuit already between cinema and alchemy. And we will try to, as we go along, this is like a little encrypted saying that we will eventually parse out as to what does this mean? Cinema, heir of alchemy, last of an erotic science. Okay. And this is, of course, here's an image of fermentation by a famous, it's a famous alchemical text in Europe called Rosario Philosopharum, okay, or the Rosary of the Philosophers from the Latin. So, and that image is basically, this already tells you that there's a kind of erotic symbolism in alchemical production. Now, getting close to the end of my talk here, I want to present to you something from Baha'u'llah. Now, Baha'u'llah is the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. And the Baha'i faith is this kind of, from a Muslim perspective, the largely kind of Orthodox Muslim perspective, it's considered a heterodoxy. And this writing that I want to look at is called the Tablet of Wisdom. And it's a long tablet that was addressed to the questions of a very prominent figure who became the disciple of Baha'u'llah. His name is Nabil. And in 1863, or no, 1874, Baha'u'llah wrote this. This tablet is called the Tablet of Wisdom or Loha Hikmat, but it can also be translated as Tablet of Philosophy, because Hikmat in the Islamic tradition is also the term that is used for philosophy. Now, these are figures that I want to parse out of this, take out of this passage, and to see how they will be related to the rest of the course, but also want to do a kind of first operationalization of a short circuit that I want you to think through here. And I will gesture to that after we read part of this. So Baha'u'llah here refers to this figure called Balinus or Apollonius of Tyana. So this is an important figure. In fact, he will be a talismanic figure for us for the rest of the course in a way. And as well as, of course, Hermes. But when we talk, interestingly enough, a lot about, if you look at even online in your regular people that produce material on Hermeticism, they almost never refer to Apollonius of Tyana or Balinus, but he's really an important figure, but particularly from the Arabico-Persianate heritage, and how that is important in aspects of this Hermetic text. So Baha'u'llah says, I will mention to thee the invocation voiced by Balinus, who was familiar with the theories put forward by the father of philosophy, Hermes Trismegistus. This term, father of philosophy, is something, is Abul Hikmat, is a term in variations of this term, appears throughout the history of Islamic thought. Okay. And also this exact term appears in Europe through that translation. So Hermes, and we will see later this term of the father of philosophy, and why Hermes is a father of philosophy as well. And then it says, regarding the mysteries of creation. So this term is really important, mysteries of creation. We will parse what that means, as given in his chrysolite tablets. We will learn more about what are these chrysolite tablets, that everyone may be fully assured of the things we have elucidated for thee in this manifest tablet. So Baha'u'llah is referring to the tablet that he has written, which if pressed with the hand of fairness and knowledge, will yield the spirit of life for the quickening of all created things. And then Baha'u'llah says, this man had said, I am Balinus, the wise one, the performer of wonders, the producer of talismans. He surpassed everyone else in the diffusion of arts and sciences, and soared unto the loftiest heights of humility and supplication. And then he quotes, look, it's clearly a quote, and then he says, and then Balinus speaks, and it's a prayer. I stand in the presence of my Lord, extolling his gifts and bounties and praising him with that wherewith he praiseth his own self. And then so it continues and it ends the quote effectively there. And then Baha'u'llah says, it was this man of wisdom who became informed of the mysteries of creation. There's that term again. And discern the subtleties which lie enshrined in the Hermetic writings. Okay, so this is going to be, we can talk more about this, but we will definitely parse much of this more in relationship to the figure of Balinus. Who was he? We're going to look at what is this mysteries of creation, because this idea of the mysteries of creation is actually a text itself called Sirrul Khaliqa, the secret of creation, which is said that he was written by Balinus or Apollonius of Tyana, but that its source was Hermes. And the mysteries that are going to be discussed is something that he will do. So we want to look at how was this text discovered by Balinus, by Apollonius of Tyana, and this apocalypse of this text itself. So how this text is related to what I said about archaeopocalypse. And we will see that it contains the most important and first and oldest reference to the most important text of the Hermetic tradition, namely the Emerald Tablet. And here's already some aspect of the chrysolite tablets that you see that Baha'u'llah is alluding to there. And so this Emerald Tablet, famously, everyone should know, or at least that it begins as above, so below, like, you know, how it was translated and translated into Latin and so on. We will look at the origin of this text, and I will provide the actual original text of this in translation, and also Balinus's reference of this discovery, which will be setting us on this trajectory of archaeopocalypse. Now, what's interesting is that I can share some material for you as well, that the Baha'i writings have some fascinating things to say about alchemy as well. Now, in the 19th century, this heritage from which the Baha'i faith, which is a post-Islamic faith, and therefore considered heterodox because it espouses a new revelation for a new era. But for this new era that the Baha'i writings give prophecies about, which is really fascinating to think through, is that one of the things they say that the coming maturity of humanity, or the coming age of humanity into the future, will have two concomitant phenomena attending them. One of them will be the arrival of universal peace, but the other one is very esoteric, and which we're interested in. It says the appearance of divine philosophy, and Baha'u'llah talks about this divine philosophy in relationship as one part of this divine philosophy as alchemy, or the Baha'i figure that followed Baha'u'llah, who was not a prophet, but he was the interpreter of the writings of Baha'u'llah. He was designated as the figure. He says that that is referred to alchemy. And then he uses also the Arabic and Islamic heritage of a phrase called sister of prophecy. So there is a term in the history of alchemical thought that alchemy is the sister of prophecy. Okay? And so these terms are used to allude to the coming of alchemy, or alchemical operation, or the knowledge of alchemy, as part of this kind of prognostication of the maturity, of attaining of the maturity of humankind. Okay? Now, that's just an interesting fact to think through in relationship to these writings that are, again, considered extremely heterodox by the majority of Muslims. But what do they, we want to think through what could they mean? If we would take that seriously, we want to look at alchemy and parse it out. As we will go along, I will tell you, when people think about alchemy, this is what we will see, that as well, that alchemy is not only the so-called transmutation of elements from lesser metals to the so-called higher metal, like gold. So the transmutation of elements to achieve gold. This is only one aspect of alchemy. And we will come to two other aspects of alchemy, and then we will see how possibly this prognostication could have interesting ramifications. Now, I will have to say more about it, but I will just say for now, the two other aspects of alchemy that we will be also concerned with is one is so as I said, one is the transmutation of metals, so achieving, let's say, gold. Second, the elixir of life, so the elixir of immortality. That is an alchemical goal. Then the third, which is something that is going to be really fascinating as we move forward, and we will be also very concerned about, which is the artificial generation of life. In other words, artificial intelligence, in a way. And so we will look at some of these Perso-Arabic sources that refer to this artificial generation and creation of life, which in the Arabic is called ilm al-takwin, right? So the knowledge of generation and creation. And so, and how, in a way, this production of kind of generating of life or intelligent life is something that is precisely an alchemical dream, an alchemical goal. And the other one is, as I said, immortality. Now, think about all of these, how we are in the midst of, in fact, in different ways, trying to achieve precisely these alchemical dreams. And in fact, the least interesting is the transmutation of elements to gold, right? But that itself, we may have achieved already through nuclear fission. But it is impossible for us to reproduce because it is incredibly expensive. And so the amount of gold we could get through this, to do fission, to do nuclear fission, which in a way what happens effectively in the sun, So we don't even have the full possibility to do it, but theoretically it's possible, and it could be even physically possible in the future, but that would be just even redundant in a sense. And so that is something that we want to think through, these different parts of alchemy and how they will also relate to, particularly when we come to the section on talismanic media, where we're talking about the animation of matter, right? Or kind of the semblance of creating new life, and how that itself is part of that dream. And we will read E.T.A. Hoffman, in particular, the Sandman. That will be the kind of locus classicus of our text, because I will be going through that text with you, aside from other material that I will be sharing in that class, which we will be particularly focusing on Giovanni Fontana's text, and then we will look at the text of E.T.A. Hoffman and other aspects of how automata, puppets, dolls have been imagined in both the literary and artistic and filmic imagination. Okay. Now, this I want to do lastly is this short circuit. So what is productive between the short circuit of what we saw in relationship to Apollonius of Tyana that Baha'u'llah mentions, to something that Antonin Artaud makes a dedication in his infamous or famous Heliogabalus, or the Crowned Anarchist. Now, this is an incredibly interesting text, but Artaud, as you may all know, he himself is a heterodox figure in terms of the orthodoxy of the, Surrealist movement. In a way, some people will say that he was literally excommunicated from the Surrealist group, but Artaud himself says that he distanced himself from the artists, from the Surrealists, because of their divergence in terms of their ideas, their theories, and where they wanted to go. And so this kind of, in a way, already you have this kind of coming together of heterodoxies, like, Baha'u'llah's, text, and him, the Baha'is, there are heterodoxy of what Muslims would say that, right? Muslim will, or particularly the clerics, not all Muslims, but the clerics and so on would say that. But then here a short circuit between Antonin and Artaud. But let's look at what Artaud says here. It says, I dedicate this book to the Manes here being the ancient Roman spirits of the dead, so therefore of Apollonius of Tyana, who was Christ's contemporary, and to any remaining truthful Illuminati in this fleeting world. And then he goes on to say, and in order to underline its profound unreality, its spirituality, its futility, I dedicate it to anarchy and to the war for this world. I dedicate it finally to the ancestors, to the heroes in the classical sense, and to the spirits of the great dead. Now, the main thing I want you to get from that, we can talk about other aspects of it, but this figure of Apollonius of Tyana, because that's the figure that we're talking about when we're talking about Balinus, which we saw in the previous slide from Baha'u'llah. And this is an important figure, and I may actually share something with you so you can read for next time as well, which gives you helpful background also for both, I think, Apollonius Tyana in the early Roman period, like in the first century, because Apollonius was this kind of sage, a philosopher who lived in and around the time of Christ, and he was considered a kind of again later, particularly a kind of wonder worker, a figure of a magician, and a producer and creator of talismans. And so that figure is transformed into particularly a kind of magical sage and a disciple of Hermes Trismegistus, especially in the Arabic Hermetica that we will look at. Many of these have not been translated, but we will look at bits and pieces of these types of works that allude to Apollonius of Tyana as well as Hermes, so that we can get a sense of particularly how, again, more of this kind of short circuit and what is productive by these types of short circuits. So I think with that, it's a lot, probably there's a lot to be said still, and maybe through our conversations and our readings, I want you to be able to, if you want to talk, we want to talk about these and also this one. So there's a lot to talk about. So I'm just going to stop sharing. And I see someone in the chat. Yeah, there you go. The bureaucratic assertivism is right. So if you have, you have thoughts, comments, questions, please feel free to say whatever you are thinking. Lynn?
Yes, thank you for the lecture. It was very interesting, and I connect very well with a lot of questions, as mediation was also part of my, well, and is part of my research for a long time. And I guess that my main question for now is how you connect the idea of mediation with alchemy, because for me, there is a certain conflict, I would say, that the idea of mediation, or at least in the sense of Kittler, but maybe also in the sense of psychoanalysis, presupposes that certain technology comes first to the actual way of thinking inside of it, right? So that there is a certain mediation which allows certain objects at all to appear, or certain ideas to emerge, or certain social practices to take place, as in this famous example of Kittler from this Ionic alphabet in ancient Greece, for instance, or the film tape, and so on and so on. So the main point is that in order to produce something which in post-romantic era would call authorship, or the soul of the human, or the big idea, and so on and so on, that it has its genesis exactly in the technology and not the other way around. And technology, of course, in that sense can be also language, or drawing, or even going into more concrete stuff like a particular technology of creating something. And as a composer myself, I find it also extremely productive to think in art, because it emphasizes that in order to at all start producing a certain object, there is a certain process to be made prior to that. And that is the process of discovering a technique, and only through this technique then you can start of actually creating something. But so coming back to my question, if I got the Benjamin's quote right, maybe I didn't, but as far as I understood it, this idea of fire, it actually puts the focus rather on the sense behind it, of something that comes out of the technology, we could say. So something that goes beyond the details, but it's not the history, but it is the phenomenon behind it. And in that sense, there is a certain contradiction to the idea of mediation in it, isn't it? Because that would imply that the product which arose from the mediation is being analyzed, or rather the life which is being produced out of all of this multiple technology, and not the process in itself. So I would be very interested what you think about this question.
Yeah, those are very, very, very good comments. Again, I think that that's why these things seem disparate, right? That's why the logic of short circuiting, which I think is an alchemical operation, can work. That's why it can bring together seemingly disparate ideas together to produce something new. And that's really precisely an alchemical operation. Because again, even in alchemical operation, going back to even to the metallurgical, the first common idea of the alchemy, what mediates the final product of the alchemical operation and the process is the philosopher's stone. So the philosopher's stone itself becomes a mediating function to bring about something new. So in a way, there is no alchemy itself always has to have something that mediates things, right? And so I think that here the alchemical idea can itself, in terms of the philosopher's stone, in terms of immortality of life or whatever, that metaphor is elixir. So the elixir, the discovery of the elixir is a mediating factor, right? So then we want to generalize that to say that in a way this contact, this mediating, is itself going back to something like the short circuit. So we're back again to the whole alchemical uh, uh, operation, but also that the alchemist is doing this. So I just wanted to say something about Benjamin. Basically, uh, this kind of methodological idea of a Benjamin in terms of an alchemist, basically by kind of like separating this kind of idea of the perishable commentary from the basically, you know, surviving, truth content, So in a way, the alchemist wants to get to the truth content, and that itself is in a way done always through mediation. So mediation is only or the truth content is achieved through that alchemical process by focusing on that mediating function, but also on that fire. Because remember, fire itself is also a mediating function here, right? So I think that bringing all of these things together may seem disparate and discordant. And there's certainly on the surface a tension, right? But this tension is productive because in each case, something new can be brought about when we shift the focus, as let's say Benjamin's alchemist does, by focusing on the flame. So the flame and the fire here itself under the alembic, as you can see you saw in the image of the alchemist here, that fire itself is also a mediating element. And so that's why all these images kind of start to collide. Fire, psychoanalysis of fire, Gaston Bachelard, and so on and so forth. So we want to think in terms of not only how these seem, because this is one of the problems, I think, ultimately with our disciplinary boundaries. I don't know. Again, if I feel like again we might not these disciplinary boundaries, and yes, there are certain if you were to look at thoroughly, let's say Hegel, does Hegel in every aspect agree with Simondon? No. Or does Simondon agree in all these aspects with Hegel? No. But that's not where we're interested. We're interested in those crossing of wires, those nodes, those moments. Not to only make a complete let's say exact match between these theorists, because they definitely, many of them are always doing different things, like let's say Kittler will bring in aspects of psychoanalysis and so on, but it doesn't work always with everything else he's doing, right? So again, there are moments of connection, those crossing of wires, that short circuiting, that we can see something new emerge that we want to think through. And so the idea is that this kind of alchemical operation itself is a mediating, because the whole idea of transmutation and its various permutations in alchemy are all related to mediating functions. From which ultimately this thing that we call, let's say, philosopher's stone emerges. So yeah, just to say my note here, what I've written for the chemist basically examines the physical wood and the ash that is left behind, and the chemist effectively analyzes the raw materials, the mechanics of the burning process, and the physical laws governing it, right? But the flame, the alchemist ignores these and basically thinks about what? The flame itself. The flame represents the enigma of life, passion, or spirit in the work. And therefore, this critic alchemist understands this burning reality as the truth content, right? And so therefore, meaning that he's not only he's not only interested in the purely historical aspect of and the context and the characters, but what goes beyond that in that story by Goethe. And that is, I think, what we want to do in this course, is that we don't want to only focus on the history of alchemy, the genealogy of alchemy, or the genealogy of Hermeticism. Yes, we want to bring that to bear, but then we want to see how it can be productive to think with in our time, in relationship to technologies of media, of optical media, and how they have also, in a way, informed it too. So Hermeticism is fascinating, as I said, because it's this whole idea of a fiction mediating reality itself and producing new realities. And this is what's fascinating, In maybe this is not the best term, that we will come back to this, but Land. Nick Land's idea of hyperstition, right? So this coming idea, these two things together, which they produce something that is efficacious in the world, right? I don't think it's exactly what's going on with what I'm talking about, but it's adjacent, because the history of alchemy, the history of Hermes and Hermes Trismegistus, is a history that is a fiction, but that fiction has affected and has an efficacious relationship to reality itself, and has produced even technologies out of that, let's say, so-called fiction, right? I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I hope, does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Thank you. I think the connection with hyperstition is also a very good one. I agree. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think next was maybe there. Thank you, Lynn. Vera, I think you had your hand up. We can go through everyone.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you. That was really fascinating. And L'Autremont's real name, by the way, was Isidore Ducasse.
That's right.
I'm really happy when he's mentioned. It's one of my favorite poets.
Yes. He was from
Uruguay.
Uruguay. Yeah. He was Uruguayan.
Yeah, and he has like this. As far as I know, he's like maybe the only canonical surrealist poet, or at least like reclaimed by the surrealist canon, that mentions condors, which are this like the biggest bird ever. He
Yes,
says
condor.
something like it's not that it's one of my favorite texts. That's why I know it by heart. Something like it's not that hatred guides the thread of my reasoning, but I fear that your own hatred will emerge from your heart and become immense, like the condor of the Andes, which is beautiful. And I'm from Chile, so I see the Andes in like almost every corner. So it's like, oh yes.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I was really interested in the beginning, and maybe this will come up later, I don't know. But you were talking about this idea of a reverse hylomorphism,
Yes.
where matter is active and form is passive. And while reading the texts for the first session, especially Kitla, I thought of Simondon and Hegel. So I was like really surprised that they were like in this one slide, because as far as if maybe I'm wrong, but um, um, Hegel and Simondon are not in the syllabus, I think, right?
No, they're not in the syllabus because they're just, yeah, they would be too complicated for me to
Yeah,
bring everything in. But I thought that it's important, at least for today, to think through some of those ideas because
yeah.
yeah. And in particular in relationship to the whole logic of short circuiting and how alchemy as a collage, as a short circuit functions. And then I wanted to bring them in to also foreground this theory of mediation as well.
Yeah, because one thing that struck me when I was reading Kitlas, and it is like I wonder how you take somebody like Kitla, how you fit him or his framework into your methodological framework, because um I think it happens to me with Kitla, something that happens to me with some like post-structuralists, which is that um, um, he kind of reproduces this metaphysical framework of hypokeimenon, like the substrate that then in the Latin tradition is translated as subject and so on, where his anti-humanist thesis still remains kind of conservatively Aristotelian, in the sense that he is not dismantling the notion of a subject and a predicate. He's just altering the topology of it. So, well, the subject is not the human subject is not the subject of history, but media kind of is. And then I guess that he would say, oh no, I'm thinking about it in terms of process still, because it is this interaction between different media following the logic of military escalation and so on. But still, he kind of just replaces as I say, like the topology of the subject. And it was very surprising that you mentioned Hegel and Simondon, because this is like something that I usually think in relation to Hegel and Simondon, namely how some post-structuralists, because of this like somehow like automatic gesture of going against Hegel, dismiss
Yeah.
his point about substance being the subject.
Yes.
So if they would say, "Oh, I'm not thinking in terms of the subject; I'm thinking in terms of processes and structures," then it would be like, "Okay, but Hegel already did that. Like he already subjectified substrate and substance." And I guess that then, like, I don't know if you agree, but I would say that Simondon is helpful in order to actually get out of that framework of Aristotelian, the Aristotelian hypokeimenon. So yeah, I guess, as I say, my question is like, given all that, which I don't know if you agree, how do you fit somebody like Hitler in your methodology?
Right. Yes. Yeah, so again, I think there's things that we can problematize with Kittler as we go along, and I think that's one of the things that I think that I want you to read as well, because if you look at even this next chapter that you will be reading for one of the other classes, this kind of almost like linear history that he provides, and many things are problematic in that linear history. Um, of the way he imagines technology, optical media, and so on. But like you said, I think that as you said, that even though he see for me like these ideas that he has about processes or in the development of technology is in a way kind of we can relate it to possibly, this is my proposition, in terms of this possibility of thinking through like process thought, you know, in relationship to Hegel's notion of dialectics, but in a way coming from different angles. So, like you said, in a way, like this idea of substance as subject in Hegel is really important because the notion of the subject and the substance, why are those two being equated by Hegel? Because ultimately, to make a long story short, is that both of them are processes of becoming through a dialectic of negation, right? This movement and motion is what I think can be related to something that you also allude to in terms of processes in Kittler, right? So, and that's why I also brought in the whole notion of, which I think is important to talk about, is uh, matter as active. Because it's in matter that this notion of motion and activity is inherent. And therefore, it is productive in itself, right?
Yeah,
And
I
it
guess like if you don't emphasize that, then I guess that Hitler could fall under the blocks category of Aristotelian right.
exactly, exactly. And so this is one of the problems with Kittler that and and even it's interesting because there's a section here, if you have read it, where he uses this moment of the discovery of photography and and he brings this whole notion of form and matter. And what he says there is, I can't find it right now, but it's precisely what you just said. Like when you look at what he's saying, he falls into um, kind of regular hylomorphism. Even though the passage about photography, the original thinker who's writing about this is saying like somehow photography is changing our relationship to matter and form, and these are becoming separated, which is absolutely false, in my opinion. Okay, that's not the case. You know, what is happening is that in fact, what photography does is ultimately the matter that is active takes on form. Photography puts a limitation on the self movement of matter, the active matter, right? And so delimits it. That's form, right? So meaning that form by delimiting is the passive dimension, whereas the matter, it is the movement and life, so to speak, and photography captures it, delimits it. So they are not separated in a way, right? But nevertheless, Kidler is in a way trying to say that, basically, yeah, kind of more Aristotelian in the way that it envisions matter and form, because it prioritizes, in a way, the passivity of matter versus activity of matter, that matter is active. And the consequences of this, of course, are really incredible. Because if that is the case, then as what I accept with Bloch's argument is that our whole notion of society and politics change, right? And I think that therefore that means that, and that's very Hegelian too, right? And so it means when we talk about technology, then it means that that all our technologies, as we will talk about in class, and further, are matter taking on form. So active matter taking on certain limitations.
So sorry,
And this
just
process is in a way never ending. That's all I want to say, is that it will bring new social formations and new political formations if we really see this as the grounding of reality, in a sense, or as that matter is this productive reality, and therefore we move towards these kind of the freedom, towards more democratic, uh, you know, open, socio-political relationships, and so on.
So then, sorry for taking up so much space, but so just to sum up, then, if I understood well, you would agree with a thesis that Hitler would fall under the categorization of an Aristotelian right.
Yeah, I would say so, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
there are still things that are productive in Hitler, right?
Yeah, of course.
We want to think through that, and we want to also, again, problematize some aspects of Hitler. Again, some of the histories and genealogies that he produces are, I think that's in our class we want to add and change some things, and make things more complex, because again, one of the other things that, even though he talks about the Lacanian imaginary, for example, in which, let's say, our whole notion of the logic of fantasy is driven from, is that he doesn't have a theory of how the imaginary itself can structure reality, right?
Yeah, because it's kind of paradoxical how, like, at some point of his text he's like criticizing this equalization of the Holy Trinity and the Turing machine. He talks about like an a Catholic cult, something like that.
Yes.
But he's thinking about computation in quite teleological terms, which leads you to a sort of harsh Aristotelian division between form and matter.
Exactly.
So it's like you're doing the same.
Exactly. No, and that's why the Aristotelian left logic that we want to kind of have as our kind of foundational kind of philosophical metaphysical proposition, in a way, more so. That's why I gave that to you to read. Makes everything open. So the future becomes open as possibilities, but then they become circumscribed by these, or take on form, but they're not inherent in the matter. So it's us, it's humanity, it's where we are in our socio-political and technological formations, where we also can actually therefore delimit where this self-movement of matter is going, or what Hegel calls the spirit, right? The self-movement of spirit. And even though, like, again, there's the classic idea that spirit at the end of history and all that, and there's all, that's not my view of Hegel. I think Hegel has a view that is open to the future and does not delimit the what will appear in the future. So it does not have a teleology. So in that sense, I'm more on Hegel's side, right? But particularly for this class, I think, again, some parts of Hegel will be important, some parts of psychoanalysis will be important, parts of this kind of history and that the optical media book by Kittler has tried to put forward. But again, we want to change, kind of problematize some of those propositions and to show that, yeah, even fictions have affected the world, and that's actually really important. And the fictions are mediations. Okay. So, Arnab, you had your hand up.
Yes, Professor. Yes, Professor. Yes. Thank you for the wonderful session. And I took up this course because a lot of my research interests are actually contained in it. So what I was thinking of, how you talked about the disparate elements and how they can be in literature, like in 15th century Italian Seicento, in Quattrocento, even in the English metaphysical poets in the 16th century, John Donne, and the conceit, the concetto that became the conceit, and how this was later taken up by Baudelaire in his Flowers of Evil, and how he talks about these disparate elements that is again then taken up by T.S. Eliot, and he writes about the sapphires and the garlic in the mud. I think in the Four Quartets. So what I was thinking of these bringing together of disparate elements for a transformation. Is there an analogy with like as in alchemy, we see two or more disparate elements actually being brought together for transformation and transmutation, for change and elevating both the elements in a third substance. So what I was thinking of that, isn't this also a metaphor like alchemy and astrology has had this worldview that actually human beings were like it's a metaphor where human beings are brought together, disparate human beings, two different human beings are brought together for the alchemical marriage, and that gives I think the hero's gamos, and it gives rise to the third entity. So is there a parallel in this, like in the worldviews, that and the human condition?
Yes, those are very good questions. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think those, yeah, bringing these seemingly disparate elements together, which brings seeming opposites, but their relationality produces something new, right? But
Absolutely.
within each of those, the ultimate for something for something new, a third thing to appear, those elements within each of the separate disparate elements that come together, they are still in a way operating within the kind of alchemical ontology, and that ontology, again, you can look at it in terms of what I have referred to as this active matter,
Right.
because it's in this motion. There's this movement and self-movement and motion and becoming in matter itself. And so by coming together of, let's say, two different forms of matter, a new matter comes forth. And this matter itself is, again, new, self-moving, and different. So, but
Right.
this new thing nevertheless still has something of the other two elements, let's say, that were brought together, right? So
Yes,
but
absolutely.
with alchemy, of course, and so in the alchemical process, ultimately, even the alchemical figure is an androgyne, so it means that it's actually both male and female, right?
Yes,
So that,
yes.
in a way, that's the philosopher's stone is androgynous, because it contains the so-called feminine and masculine at the same time. So this is something, yeah, I think in many ways artists and writers have been doing in a way differently throughout time, by bringing these disparate elements together, and then therefore, in fact, producing their artwork, producing their writings, and so on. So it's something that I think adheres into many things, but when you make it explicit, it becomes more visible, right? But it's already being it's already being done by human beings all the time. In a way, we're always already doing this. We're already doing this. Our imagination is the alchemical alembic that produces these connections.
Yes.
And then finally, a new thing emerges. And the question would be interesting to think about: can LLMs do that? Right? That's an interesting question to think about. Okay, so all right.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arnav. Livia.
Yeah. Hello. Hi,
Hello.
Farshid.
Hi.
Thank you for your lecture. So what I was thinking is maybe a little bit related to the point Arnab has touched on, which is in a lot of alchemical texts, they mention the human as part of the short circuit from which something happens, and that for the elixirs or for the philosopher's stone or for anything to be done, there's this requirement of a purification of the spirit in order to get the formula right. And maybe that is what approaches the alchemist with the prophets, as you said, because we are not there yet. I think that's what makes alchemy kind of like a still relevant science or philosophy, because the purification of the human has not yet been achieved. So we don't know actually what we would be capable of doing once that purification happens. And the human is also the mediator with all the other things that are being created. Like if we are creating new life, and if LLM turns to be new life and it achieves consciousness at some point, we would still be somewhat like, if we are not the mediators of what comes after, we were at least the mediators of what came to be, that made that be something else in the future. So yeah, I guess it's just a comment of this alchemical process of the self as well, and maybe that's linked also to the high precision, because we can only imagine the futures as good as we are, and maybe we're not living amazing realities yet because we have not achieved that level of purification inside.
Yeah, wow, that's really great comment. Yeah, and I think there's definitely profound ideas there, because again, as you know, many people are resistant to the whole idea of alchemy in terms of its history of metallurgical dimension of like the transmutation of gold. A lot of people in scholars in terms of the history of alchemy, they want to basically reduce alchemy to proto-chemistry, which I don't think is actually doing service to the entire history of alchemy, because things are much more complex. We already have those ideas in which human, the transformation or transmutation of elements are being analogized to the transmutation and transformation of the human being at a spiritual, mystical level. And we already have this with someone like Zosimos of Panopolis, who was a kind of Egyptian kind of Hermetic, alchemist. And already in his work, you see this process at work, in which the transmutation of elements outwardly is doing the work of an inward alchemical transmutation and transformation. And as you said, one of the stages of that is purification. Now, this itself can be related to the two things, coming back to also the notion of matter as active and in motion. So in a way, what we see in the alchemical transmutation, the process of alchemy itself, is the idea of creation, right? So in a way, that this mirror of creating something that is new and transforming is inherent to the analogy or the idea of alchemy. But what's fascinating is that, because why? Because this process is dynamic, right? That's what I want. So that's why matter is dynamic, right? As we've talked about in terms of the Aristotelian left. And this process is dynamic, right? And so that's why in some of the alchemical texts, when it talks about, for example, the transmutation of elements, it can go up towards gold, but it can go down into the most base element. So the transmutation has upward and downward, or these are not exact terms, but the process is reversible, right? And that's key. And that's why also, that's why if we take the alchemical analogy, history is not effectively only linear. And also our own subjectivities are not linear. right? So everything can have this alchemical dimension of transmuting up towards gold or descending down to, let's say, the base metal or copper or whatever. So meaning that the purification may not always be achieved, and it can go backwards. Because why? Because subjectivity is dynamic, because again, as coming back to Hegel, substance is subject, right? And that's why there is ultimately a relationality between object and subject, because the world itself is becoming, and that's the human subject is becoming, but what it becomes is unknown, because meaning that it will take forms which delimit it and will always have that possibility. So it's open, it's not teleological, and the movement can be ascent or descent, right? And so that's why we don't know precisely what the future will take in terms of the LLMs and so on, but the trajectory is not looking good, right? Because of the ideological underpinnings of our societies, and where capitalism and profit dominate our ideas, and therefore, and also the monopoly that they can have on these technologies and what that will mean. The only thing we can do is to think through these things and to have an active theories and therefore unrelationalities that are different than what we will be just only receiving in, so we have to not be formed like receptive, but we have to be on the side of matter. So we have to, let matter, be our first and primary way of thinking through everything. And this is in this sense, which is very strange, because this idea of materialism is a very different idea of materialism, because it can have this materialism that we're talking about. It can be also influenced and inspired by religion and divinity and so on. But then also it can be seen to be of this kind of very like literal materialism of Ernst Bloch, right? But I think the meeting point of thinking through this in terms of alchemy, we can also see that what makes matter, let's say, have that dimension of activity is that it is being, influenced by an energy that is, let's say, divine. This is already a point that the Aristotelian, like Avicenna and others, like the Ismaili philosophers that we will talk about quickly later, like Sheikh Ahmad Ahsai, and the Baha'i writings are an heir to. So all of this, is there as well, but also the Hegelian, Aristotelian left, so to speak, of the Marxist left. This is like a productive tension, in my opinion, and therefore we shouldn't really fully try to resolve it. We shouldn't try to resolve this tension. Okay, we should let the tension take its course, in my opinion, and I think that's the best way to do it. And even though, for example, if you read Ernst Bloch, he constantly wants to reject that part, but I don't think you can fully reject it, because it's just somehow that tension is there between this kind of aspect of the religious, spiritual, mystical heritage that sees matter as active, but also this kind of reaction to religion and the history of religion that the left had, based on, again, this dominating dimension of religion, right? So, or kind of like trying to, like this whole idea of like that somehow religions are not allowing that freedom, right? But no, but so therefore meaning that no, if we look at matter as active, and even if it's related to somehow to that spiritual divine impulse, which creates it as active, human freedom is there not by negated, but upheld, right? And so the ultimate goal is, this is leading to human freedom, all of that. And what is our responsibility with this freedom? And that technology that emerges out of us in this state of, let's say, freedom, what can we do with it? What forms of technologies can we create? And these are the options that we have. We have choices. We have, and it's up to us, right? And so that's why, again, political consciousness, social consciousness is important, because it means that we are going to be active subjects, politically active subjects. So again, here, these two are not negating each other, but they are coming together, in fact. Anyways, I think that was a big rant. I'm sorry about that, but thank you for your comments, Livia.
Thank you.
Alex.
Yeah, that is a great lecture. I kind of come from a background where I don't really know much about alchemy, which I suppose is why I'm here. And one of the things I think really struck me was you mentioned this idea, and I do think it's a prevailing idea that, we view alchemy as a pre-science, right?
Yes.
And I thought it was really funny when you said, actually, we are still trying to achieve and produce the alchemical goals. And to me, when you were like listing those 3 alchemical goals, and I just think, I always thought like Philosopher's Stone and gold, right? That's always the one I think that is pushed. And then I think, elixir of life, and then you of course get to the artificial generation of life, and you're like, we're definitely here, right? And then and then I'm thinking, you haven't mentioned like the crucible yet, and then I'm like, reality is a kind of crucible, right? And with all of these tensions, and then you bring in Hegel as well, and I'm thinking, okay, alchemical process in terms of like perpetual synthesis, and I is that kind of where you're going with that? And then I wondered, you talk about mediation, and I was like, okay, well, I feel like our view of the kind of scientifically minded view of alchemy as a prehistory is a kind of mediation, because I'm mediating alchemy through that lens already. And then I think about the end products of the alchemical goals, and then I wonder, when they talk about things like gold and life, is that where we stop? Because for me, can't we interpret these as very, like, I suppose the crass word would be like poetical kind of interpretations of like, what do they mean by gold and life? And so more comments that I've arrived at here than a question.
Right. Yes. No, that's absolutely wonderful. All those connections that you're making, they're, exactly what hopefully this class and course is going to do. And I think we will go into that a little bit more as we go along, as well as that, let's say, gold, the elixir of life, and the artificial generation of life and creation and all that. Those could be seen literally, but they could have symbolic value. And some of them were taught literally, by some alchemists, right? We will talk about also Chinese alchemy, and particularly Chinese alchemy, for example, influenced Perso Islamicate alchemy or Arabic alchemy, which of course is Much of alchemical discourse enters Europe through the translation of Arabic texts that we talked about, and much of that was Hermetic in origin. But also, Chinese alchemy, for example, was first interested in also the elixir of life. And for the Chinese alchemists, this was also to be thought often literally. So, how to achieve kind of immortality physically. But then also, some of the Taoist alchemists, philosophers, did not think of the elixir of life as literal. And same thing with the later adaptation of this notion of elixir of life in the Islamicate and Arabo-Persian literature. And then same thing with the artificial generation of life and so on, because some of it is very literal. It almost sounds like you know kind of like producing in basically like animals and and humans in a kind of laboratory, and that whole process could seem to have a literal meaning, but then also it could have other functions and poetic and more symbolic meanings, which they were given, right? And as we said, that many of these literary sources also, all the way up to all these things went to literary sources too. So many of the alchemical literature and the Hermetic literature eventually gave birth to literary ideas and sources. Like we talked, I mean, the most famous is Frankenstein that I didn't want to put in the syllabus, but it's interesting that it's in the conversation today, and that aspect of Frankenstein does have this background that we're talking about. But I want to focus on for that one class with E.T.A. Hoffman. But yeah, so this history again, if we only look at it as in terms of history, genealogy, and so on, and to try to trouble some of that history and to try to trouble some of that genealogy as we want to do, but also we want to think about it in terms of what are the symbolic connotations, what are the metaphoric ways and the operationalization of these things, and how they are in fact being operationalized without, like, unconsciously, though some of it even consciously. Like, what's fascinating is that if you've all noticed, there's like this return to like Nick Land. Why is he so famous right now? Because he's like so-called, he's like supposedly there's like an article that he's like the favorite philosopher of Silicon Valley. And those things can be theorized in relationship to why are they now interested in magic, alchemy, the occult sciences, which alchemy is a part of, by the way. And why and wherefore is this happening? And I mean, it's unfortunate, but I think Nick Land is also himself a little too Christianizing, because his apocalypse is literally the end of the world. Like, so his notion of apocalypse is not is the connotative meaning of apocalypse, not the denotative, which I'm using, which is related to unveiling and revelation. But his is this connotation that we have of apocalyptic, that it will be the end of everything in a sense, that as we know it. So, but that's Nick Land notion of the whole idea that capitalism and what its products, like particularly the LLMs and the artificial intelligence itself, is that because capitalism is artificial intelligence itself, which in my opinion, I don't think that's correct. But nevertheless, Land is important because he was one of the early figures that was thinking through these ideas and their relationship to the technologies and to the development of something that is beyond the human, and so on. You know, and the so-called even transhumanist and post-humanist and so on. As he said somewhere famously, nothing human will be left in the future, or something to that effect. But we want to think through all of that in a different way, in a different register. And we want to bring in the history or kind of a genealogy of alchemical and particularly Hermetic tradition, and see what that aspect of that we said about this kind of fictionality and the poetics of it and all that, how that is productive as well. So there's different operations that we're doing in this class, and I hope we can get through all of them. Okay, does that make sense? Perfect. Vera.
Yes, I had a question on alchemy, and I guess like the just like my ignorance of like traditions of alchemy that are not Western. Just as parenthesis, because you mentioned like how like Nick Land still like Christianizes a lot. I think that like lots of sometimes I think of Nick Land as just like an expression of the evangelical envy of the exuberance of Catholicism. It's like they thought like, oh, our theology is like way too boring. Let's just like make something exciting.
Okay.
Because we don't have cathedrals, and let's say that cathedrals are bad. It's like, come on. It's just like evangelicals are boring.
Yeah.
Anyway, but like, yeah, about alchemy. I was wondering, as I said, like, I had no idea about this, of how maybe, well, like Bloch mentions this, and I haven't read his whole book. I was just like reading the part of the text that was supposed to be read for this session. But he talks about Aquinas, and I guess that one of the main boundaries that medieval scholastics would make against the alchemical desire to create any sort of thing would be the status of nothingness. Now, the ultimate act of creation can be just made out of nothingness, which is an action that just God can do. And then I was interested in how that would connect with Bloch's differentiation between the new and the novum, because even radical alterations of matter for scholastics would still be thought in the realm of nature, just like a monster. The monstrum was still in the realm of nature. It's a divine sign. It's something anomalous, but it's still something natural. It would still be thought as something that was natural, because it was something that was a product of matter. Matter is already created. The act of creation is the one that is out of nothingness. And I was wondering whether even Bloch talks about this, because as I said, I haven't read the whole book, of if there is what would be the conditions of this novum, or what would be the conditions of the creation that alchemy, out of which alchemy could create something, and maybe there is a line there, like between the Western tradition and non-Western traditions, because it seems that for alchemy to be able to create something that is radically new, then matter would have to still retain a seed of nothingness, at least for somebody like Aquinas, right? Otherwise, he would say this is just Aristotelian possibility. It's still not something radically new. It's something that was already somehow retained in the parameters already given in creation, already given in matter. Yeah, that.
Okay, this is where we're getting to the nitty-gritty, but it's more complicated. But I didn't want to go too much into Aquinas, even though I seem to have given you to read that actually accidentally. But I think that draws us away from what I wanted to focus on. Because again, you know, what Bloch is trying to show is that there is a difference between active matter and passive matter, and basically that ultimately that Aquinas and others fall into that passive matter, right? But like you said, though, it's interesting to think about it in that way, in terms of the whole idea that matter is therefore from God, this idea that it is creation ex nihilo, and therefore it has this productive possibility of a productive dimension to it and all. But I think that Bloch wants to, because why? Because Bloch wants to say, like already in Aristotle, because in Aristotle, the hylomorphism is eternal, right? It's not creation ex nihilo. So matter and so on, none of that is ex nihilo, right? And which therefore also serves his materialism, because there's nothing outside that is creating this matter out of nothing, right? But what's interesting is to think about is that with Avicenna, as he's positioning it, is that Avicenna is agreeing to some degree with Aristotle that it is eternal, but this eternality of matter and form is itself, particularly for matter, it is divine inspired, or originated from the divine. That means that it's already within it, right? So now, but the only thing Bloch wants to do is just to take that divine dimension out and say no, it's always been there, and it's its own, it's a matter in the world, it's imminent to it, and there's nothing transcendent.
Then maybe I don't know if you would agree that then like somebody like Simondon would be like very helpful of like for thinking through some sort of like synthesis between Avicenna and Aristotle, right? It's like, yeah, let's like drop that question of like radical beginning or eternity. This principle of nothingness is already immanent to matter. So instead of like beginning or eternity, we can just think of metastability.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think, we can bring in, so in a way, why not think both of them? How could we think them both from a different perspective? Right? This is like from a certain perspective, in a way, the eternity, let's say, of the world and matter and all that is operative, and from a certain perspective, it's creation ex nihilo. But then we need to theorize that perspective, like you said, through Simondon and others, to have a more robust idea of how these two could be simultaneously true in a sense, right? And that's the tension I want to work with throughout the class as well, is that that again, I think is something that is with these texts we can excavate more rigorous, ideas about matter and form, and how these are being operationalized, even in ideas of, as we said, alchemy. And we will have more to say, hopefully, about alchemy as we go forward, because I do want to think through. I think one of the our students said, like, how the world itself is like an alembic or what have you. I mean, in a way, yeah, I think that everything is already an alchemical process, right? Because matter itself is an alchemical process, because matter is that active motion, right? And so that is the motion, but that motion can go back and forth, swing back and forth. And so we want to look at so many aspects of our technologically mediated society and our politics, our sociality, and our futurity in relationship to that dialectic of matter and form, and then the emphasis on the activity of form, and that it's a becoming. And so we want to focus on that, and hopefully we will get more into the nitty-gritty as we go along. But I do like what you were saying about this ex nihilo. So I'm saying hold those two together, right? And so that's important. Thank you so much, Vera. And thank you so much to everyone. I think our time has come to an end. I really appreciate all of you, your comments and the discussions you've made. They've made me really think. I'm learning from you as well. So it's not like this is a dialogue. Hopefully I bring some material, and then our conversations are basically creating more food for thought for me as well. And then for next class, hopefully we will be able to get a little bit more interestingly into some of the nitty-gritties of what we already talked about. So Archaeopocalypse for next class.
Thank you, Farshid. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. See you
Bye.
next week.